right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a pretty packed agenda this morning. Just welcome everybody to the October TPA membership meeting. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Couple quick housekeeping items. We are going to be using the chat and the Q&A function today. So throughout the course of the meeting, if you have any questions or comments, please do feel free to post in the chat or in the Q&A. We're going to be sharing a bunch of materials today, so keep an eye out on the chat for some links. And if you miss anything, don't worry. We'll be following up the meeting as we usually do with a link to the recording, as well as all the materials that we'll cover today, including the presentations. And one more thing we're going to be doing today, we do have a poll question, so keep an eye out for that. Once we're ready for that, we would ask that you respond, and that'll help get us some conversation points. So with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick to get us started.
Thank you, Craig. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So we do have some breaking news on the legislative front. So we've announced that here the last couple of days in terms of House Bill 1939 going to a vote next week, next Wednesday, at the House Human Services Committee. So we're going to devote a good amount of time to that. Budget updates, we don't have a lot to report, as you may know, have heard by now. So I know we're going to have Scott Bishop joining us from Long Nyquist. We will get Scott's insights on some things budget related. And so Craig, it looked to me to be somewhat of a quiet week on the ODP updates front, kind of surprisingly. So I know we're up to date on the site as far as what's been posted. I think that there may be some announcements. I think that most of what's come out recently has been revolving around performance-based contracting for supports coordination. ODP's made some changes to my ODP on the site there, but Craig, jump in if there's anything that you want to highlight. Given the nature of the agenda in this meeting today, there are a few things on performance-based contracting that I probably want to just comment on right up front. And I don't know how much time we'll get to address this at the end of the meeting today, but we did have a couple of sessions dating back to September 18th. We did a roundtable discussion with performance-based contracting, with supports coordinators, and really stakeholders from across the state in every area. We just wanted this to be a very broad educational session. We then revisited this again October 15th. And from that meeting, we heard a lot of recurring themes. I want to say that we did request of ODP an extension to the submission deadline for supports coordinators. That is November 1. There will not be an extension. That was denied. We were on a tight time frame. So my understanding is everybody's accessed the portal. I think there are very few, if any, that have submitted at this point in time. And we're like high 50s, low 60s of people who have signed their contracts. But we're past the contract date for supports coordination. And I know even though this affects virtually everybody on this call, there really aren't as many entities that are involved in the direct reporting of this. So as I said, 50 to 60, I think the list of SCs is probably around 64. There's a combination of the types of delivery of supports coordination, and supports coordination entities also do TSM, so there's a lot of people involved. Like 57,000 people are involved to some degree or another by the supports coordination and affected by this, but it's very few entities. So those entities have already needed to sign their contracts. The portal is open. The reporting is happening right now, and it is due still by the end of next week, so by November 1st. So just want to reiterate, if you do have that obligation to submit your data, that although we've asked, it is going to stay at the submission deadline of November 1st. ODP has committed that they will review all of that and provide feedback by December 1st. And then really, pending the approval of the waiver, which ODP does expect will be approved before the end of the year, everything will go in effect January 1st, 2026, as far as new supports coordination methodology performance measures. New reimbursement will not go into effect until, however, July 1, 2026. So there's some time to maneuver around that. One of the recurring themes that I know I am hearing, and we are hearing from you involved in this directly, is the impression that from how you run your numbers, that there is a shortfall on revenue. I've continued to communicate that to Kristen and ODP. So I think we will have some work to do once this phase is completed and we can take a longer look at that. So no commitment yet on when we might convene a next session on this. I will say that I spoke to Kristen yesterday. She will be at our TPA meeting next month, November 21st. So it's a little less than a month away. So hopefully by then, a lot of this will have shaken out and we can get some more direct information, not only on performance-based contracting for supports coordination, but also for upcoming reporting for residential services as well. So I think those are the main updates before we really get into kind of the heart of our discussion today. So to kind of set this up, if you can go next slide, Craig, this is just a little sneak peek at our poll for this week, where we had talked a little bit in the preamble to this about budget cycle, what's happening at the federal government level, which of course you're probably well aware there's a shutdown at the federal level. We do not have a state budget still at the state level. And how these budget cycles work and really the impact that has on services with people with disabilities and on our world in IDA specifically. So this is really the feedback that you've given us. If you believe current federal budget priorities adequately reflect the funding needs of community-based IDA services, and 82% who voted indicated no. So we have an opportunity here today, and what we're going to talk about a lot is Pennsylvania legislation to increase our IDA fee schedule rates annually. So we're going to get into that discussion. We're going to talk about the two bills that really prevail on this topic, and we're going to have some feedback from some of our members, our committee. As I mentioned, Scott Bishop, one of the state lobbyists that's been involved very actively, has worked with us for a long time. So we're going to talk about that a good bit today. While we're on this slide, I will ask you to consider, if you have a question you would like to present and recommend to us as a poll question, please don't hesitate to do that. And we always want to make sure that what we're asking is really relevant to information that we want to share with members. So we try to land on that best we can from conversations that we are having, but we're always open to your suggestions and recommendations as well. So please don't hesitate to do that. So where we really want to begin, if you can go next slide, Craig, and if I can ask you also, if you can drop the full version of this letter into chat. This is on our website, so you can go to our ACT page. This is pretty newly minted. This was completed and issued last Friday. Actually, it was pretty late on Friday. So this is really the first full week that we've been able to address this letter, get some feedback, and we really haven't talked to membership about it. Of course, we did push this out to members for your review, but there's just a few things that I think help set the stage for the rest of our discussion today. And again, I want to make everybody aware that we've done this. I think it's really important also to state that this is for the last several years, you see the top banner. These are the 6 associations that have worked together to collaborate, develop recommendations, and then make a unified budget request to the governor. And the way the cycle works, the second week of Tuesday every year, second Tuesday in February, I should say, every year, the governor puts forth a budget, a proposed budget that the way it's supposed to work gets enacted by July 1. We are still in an open cycle on that. So the February budget in 2025 for the current fiscal year, 25-26, was introduced and presented by Governor Shapiro this February. It is still not enacted. However, the process to set next year's budget is already underway. And I would say we're probably even a little later than we might want to be on this letter. However, we did submit this letter. This is just a paragraph from it. If I can just briefly kind of highlight how we started the letter, if you have it in front of you, again, it's in the chat. You can find it on the site. We've already put it out to membership and more broadly. But we do start out by recognizing the multi-year program growth strategy. This is an initiative that Governor Shapiro has put his mark on. This is directly targeting the emergency waiting list for adults. It's a number that's in the mid 3,000s. The overall waiting list for intellectual disability services is still north of 11,000 people. So there are a lot of people who were shut out of the system. So this has been an initiative, again, the governor has put forward beginning last year. This has also to do with the release of new waivers. Because there is no budget, the department has actually identified additional waivers that they could add if there was approved spending based on projected savings from the IDA budget. So without getting into the weeds on exactly how that works, there is some holdup from people coming off of the waiting list as a result of the budget not being passed at this point in time. But the administration has touted a 28% reduction to the emergency waiting list. Again, not the total waiting list, but the targeted area are adults. So the adult emergency list has reduced. I think there's more transparency from ODP in terms of waiting lists. They are publishing this information directly on a monthly basis. And we will continue to watch this, report this out to members. But we did want to acknowledge this. And Craig, as we all know here, that Craig and Arc Human Services and Ed Piccarini's organization hosted the governor just about a month ago. He actually talked about multi-year growth strategy. He talked about this number. He talked about his continuing commitment that more work needs to be done. So we're just taking advantage of all of that exposure, the public statements of Governor Shapiro, and building off of that in terms of the need to do more. And this is something the governor has said directly. So we did the similar letter last year. We asked for a 3% increase. Again, in 2024, there was a rate increase. So rate increases for IDA have occurred twice over the last couple of years. In 2022, there was a rate increase, and then again in 2024, largely due to your advocacy and our continued messaging of the needs to really catch up with inflation. So we begin really by acknowledging this initiative. We then make a very specific ask, which is what you see on screen in paragraph 2 of 6.9%. So what you see in the last sentence here is actually one of the things that we didn't realize is the publication of inflation data is actually delayed because of the federal shutdown. In fact, I think you may be seeing news reports. I think it was released just this morning. So I have not looked at that. We have been running the numbers on the basis of annual calendar year inflation. So as you'll see here, 2.65% is basically where we ended last year in inflation for CPI-U, the measure, and where we were through August. So now we have the September data. What I'm seeing is that it did tick up. So that 2.65% number is probably right around 3, which means a projection of 4 is very reasonable. So we're taking last year's actual 2.9, projected this year of 4%, and we're making a 6.9% request to across the board IDA fee schedule rates. And the next paragraph of this letter really gets into what we're going to talk about today, which is the legislation. And we are really indicating that we jointly, again, support this legislation to adjust fee schedule rates annually based upon the Consumer Price Index. And we lastly say that our request this year in this letter is really to just fill the gap between fee schedule increases that did not occur and before this legislation would be enacted, to fill the gap of what won't be covered through legislation if enacted, and what has not been processed in terms of any fee schedule adjustments. Again, this year's budget included no fee schedule increases for the IDA community. So that's an overview of the letter. The signers are all of the leads from these entities and organizations, associations that you see. We know many of you may belong to more than just TPA, or may be members of those associations in addition to or other than TPA. So again, I think it is evidence of a continuing unified effort, and the legislation is likewise part of that effort. So I think we can go into our next slide, Craig. And with that, I want to take the opportunity to invite in Nancy Murray, who chairs our Government and Advocacy Committee, Bob Barber, who's with us today, Scott Bishop. I don't know if you're there yet, Scott, if you can jump in as well, if you are, but Nancy and Bob, welcome. Okay, good, Scott. But glad to know you're there. So we're going to really bring you all into this discussion right now. So I welcome you guys in. I thank you for being here. You're all active in our weekly Government and Advocacy Committee meetings. So, with that, Nancy, maybe I'd like to stop right there because, in a moment or two, we'll talk about the bill. And I think that when I go back a few years, this bill actually started with this committee. And I want to say that goes back probably 5 years ago. I want to acknowledge some of the work, TPA did, prior to me being at TPA. Ed Piccarini had assembled a group of legislators, and we started to do this thing that we now call, and I think we called then, Legislative Appreciation and Awareness, IDA Awareness event that we do. We now do it in collaboration with Representative Dan Miller. But I know when I started here, I really wanted to maintain those relationships, and we started to bring these legislators in. And one of those legislators was my high school classmate, Mark Longetti from House District 7, I believe. And Mark was a staple. He would come to every one of our sessions, as did Representative Dan Miller. And that's how I got to know Representative Dan Miller and his work that he's been doing for a very long time in the disability community, particularly in intellectual disability and autism. So it was really those two legislators that were really leaders for us. And we started to ask the question, how can we get a bill introduced? And my friend and colleague Mark Longetti said, there's no reason you guys can't start to initiate this. And with Mark, with Representative Miller, and a very small committee at the time, but that committee has sustained, and I say this every once in a while here, I hope, but it meets weekly, and it's grown and it's expanded. So Nancy, let me toss this over to you to just say a couple of words, and if you want to welcome in Bob and Scott yourself. But you do a tremendous job every week assembling a group of advocates and provider organizations from across this state. So I want to give you a moment to talk about that.
Well, as Patrick said, we've been working on this now for at least 5 years. The time is now, right now. We now have bipartisan bills in both the House and the Senate. We have the support of the Office of Developmental Programs. We've got 6 associations working on this bill. The timing could not be better. The fact that Representative Benham introduced this just about 2 months or a month ago, a little more than a month ago, that it's now being, presented, hopefully voted on next week by the House Human Services Committees. This is extraordinary that a bill is moving this quickly with this kind of support. So, we know that nothing is perfect. But this bill obviously is the best bill that we're ever going to see on this issue. And now it's up to, every member of TPA to make a phone call to our House members, our senators, and get this across the finish line. We have the time to do it. We've got the support to do it. And frankly, if we don't do it now, it's going to be our own fault. And we're going to be going back to, 3-year reviews of rates and, annual having to run to the legislature to ask for more funding. And we all know how that turns out. So this is an opportunity before us that frankly, we just need to work really hard and get this across the finish line. Thanks,
Let me
Patrick.
jump in for a moment, Nancy, just to say what you're seeing on screen is not our bill. I wanted to sort of begin with the just stepping back and taking nothing for granted, making sure that we're talking about exactly what is in place right now. We're going to talk about this regulation a little bit. So I just want to be clear. What we're showing you is the world we live in currently. We have been living in technically since 2019, since these regulations were finally passed. This regulation was actually developed in 2017. It just took a couple of years to actually get it on the books. But I'll stop there because Scott and Bob, I want to give you a chance to really kind of speak this. We are going to get into the bill. We're going to spend some time, as I said, just kind of educating. But Bob, you and your family have been in this business for a long time. Let me go to you first.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Bob Barber. I'm a senior vice president of the Barber National Institute. I just want to thank everybody for being on the call. I want to thank Patrick and Nancy for their leadership here and pushing for the existence of House Bill 1939. And so what I'm going to do just very briefly here is just kind of talk from my perspective. Patrick will get into the details of the proposed bill. But from my perspective, what does House Bill 1939 mean for providers? It's more than just a policy update. I think it's a recognition of the value of our workforce and the need to create sustainability in our system. I think, as Nancy said, for far too long, we've operated in a climate of real uncertainty, where rate increases are sporadic and our ability to recruit and retain the DSPs that we need in order to serve the individuals that we serve is constantly under threat. But this bill changes that. It ties annual fee schedule rate increases to the consumer price index. Again, Patrick will get into the details. But what that does is it gives us as providers a predictable, inflation-sensitive funding model. That means we can plan better, we can budget smarter, and most importantly, I think, is that we can pay our staff fairly. It also mandates that when rates go up, wages for the DSPs must go up too. I think that that's not just good policy. I think it really is a moral imperative. Our DSPs are the heart of our missions. They deserve compensation that reflects their impact. As we discuss this specific House bill, I know that there will be some concerns. The bill's success depends on full funding from the General Assembly. Yes, there will also be new reporting requirements, but to be clear, the alternative is continued instability, continued turnover, continued increases on the wait list for families who are really counting on us. And so, this gives us an opportunity to change all that. I think, this and with Patrick and Nancy's leadership, this gives us an opportunity for us to stand together as providers to say, we support this bill because it supports our workforce, it supports the providers, and it supports the people we serve. And as I think about this, and as I'm talking to my legislatures, I do just want to talk about, it's important that this bill gets bipartisan support, and so far it has. But while you're out advocating, whether you're talking to a Democratic or Republican member of the House or Senate, this bill offers something that both sides can get behind. For the Democratic colleagues, I think it's about equity. I think it's about workforce investment, and I think it's about protecting a vulnerable population. I think on the Republican side of the House, the Republicans are very concerned about fiscal responsibility. And so, I think the argument to be made to the Republican side of the House is, when we underfund these services, we don't save money. The cost gets shifted elsewhere. So, families are forced into crisis care. Emergency room visits and hospital stays become more frequent. Individuals are forced to stay in or go back to institutional settings that are far more expensive than the community-based supports. This bill helps to prevent those costly outcomes by keeping people stable, keeping them supported, and keeping them in their homes. It also introduces accountability, which I know, Republicans like. Providers, as the bill sits today, will need to provide data, and those who don't comply, will face more than likely penalty. But that's a built-in safeguard to ensure that the taxpayer dollars are used as intended. And so those are kind of some of the points that I would hit on if I were speaking to my legislatures. And so what I'm asking you to do is to be vocal about this. Reach out to your legislatures, submit public comments. As Nancy said, the ball is rolling as we speak, so sooner rather than later, make your voices heard. But I think we can have a real impact if we're unified on this. And so that's my spiel.
Well, thanks, Bob. And we'll ask you to weigh in along the way here as well. But appreciate all your words of support. All you're doing there and really understanding the impact of this and conveying it to our members here today. So, Scott, we'll bring you in next, and I just want to acknowledge, David Caligiuri is our lobbyist at TPA, but we have worked with Scott before, along Nyquist, and due to the generosity, first of Ruth Siegfried, who was previously CEO of Envision, and now Kim Love, the current CEO of Envision, who maintains a relationship with Scott's firm. And Kim has wanted Scott and Scott's colleague Lou to be involved, and they have been involved. And that's an invitation that really goes to any organization that wants to be a part of this and wants to join these committees. But Scott, we appreciate having you with us today. Looks like you're kind of on the road too, so thanks for making the time. Sure. I knew you're in between places or meetings, but if you want to just say hello, I want to get to you more specifically as we kind of get into the lawmaking process and a lot of the advice that you give our committee on a weekly basis. But please take a moment to say hello and anything that you would like to say about the bill.
Sure, and thanks, Patrick. And really, to this group, I'll say it really is a testament to the perseverance of the TPA on a couple different fronts that this bill is where it is. It's working with legislators, as Patrick has kind of outlined his own story, but it goes even beyond just just working with the legislature. Second most, maybe even more importantly, is the work that TPA has done in bringing all 6 of the different trade associations that represent the IDA community together to be on the same page. That has been a tremendous amount of work in the last couple of years leading to this bill. And the third, I think, again, for this group is to know that TPA leadership has worked tremendously hard within the governor's office to get to a place where you have the department and the governor's office, kind of aligned with where TPA is in the provider community. So those are no small feats. And again, for this group, knowing you're in very good hands and capable hands with the TPA, I think it's worth noting. The bill itself is, it's the start of the process. But, for all of you who've been parents, you can't get to your baby's second steps till you get to your baby's first steps. So this is an important moment in which the legislation we anticipate will move forward next week out of committee, and then probably in November the House will consider it. And these are 2 big steps. And I'll just tell you the reason they're big is, generally speaking, once a piece of legislation has passed a chamber, it now becomes it's viable legislation. There's going to be twists and turns, and I'm happy to talk about the reality of the legislative process, which is unlike anything in the real world, private world, all the world that you all operate in. But you can't get to that second step until you've gotten through a chamber, which again is fairly likely here in the next month or so. So Patrick, I'll just pause there and look for direction, how in depth or how you'd like me to talk. But really, for this group, the only other thing I'll say, reflecting what Bob had to say as well, is this is going to be the time for all of you to be out there talking to legislators and pushing for action on the bill, not just in the House, but through the Senate and getting it ultimately to the governor's desk. So this is the time where your TPA folks, your leadership, they'll continue to do the work that they need to do, but they can't be alone in that regard. It'll be incumbent upon all of you to help. And when they give you encouragement or ask you to do specific tasks, that you do so with a smile and a lot of energy.
Well, thank you, Scott. I hopefully have a slide that'll be right in your wheelhouse coming up. Not the perfect slide by far, but we want to talk a little bit about legislative the process, because as we talk about these bills, because where we want to begin right now is really the lay of the land as it currently is. And I think, again, we want to be completely transparent with you. We want to hear your feedback, but at the end of the day, I will sort of echo what you've already heard from all of us today. Getting behind the bill is very important as a political process, and to sort of bypass any debate that we might have to try to improve things. We can't do that at the expense of not having this legislation as it's been drafted enacted to advance this cause of getting away from what's on screen right now. So I'm kind of eager to get off of this slide. I feel like having this regulation sit here that we've all been living with for a long time, whether you realize it or not, this is kind of what dictates Mercer reports and the things we talked about in terms of, even to this day, we're going to talk about some of what is produced by ODP in terms of the rate setting process. And it's really just this simple regulation. This is the entirety of fee schedule rate regulation that governs all ODP services and IDA rates and programs. So I'm not going to talk about this at length, but as you can see in the highlighted portions, in establishing the fee schedule rates in subsection A, and subsection A is sort of this long sentence that just talks basically about, we're going to do market-based, which market-based in a regulation of this type, and from the perspective of the state, is we're going to make sure that we pay enough money that people get into this business and sustain these folks that need services. So the 10 elements under paragraph B really are what the state looks at in determining rates. And that's really the work that they engage through a contractor, Mercer Government and Human Services Consulting. And we often talk about Mercer reports, and that's the basis and foundation for the rates. But paragraph C is really what's critical and really what we're up against. The department will update the data used in subsection B at least every 3 years. And there's not much to that, but it's very important. Update the data doesn't mean that the department will increase the rates every 3 years. It means they will update the data. They will look at those 10 elements and they will decide if they need to do anything. And again, reflecting back on paragraph A, do they need to do anything or not? We, of course, argue that costs go up all the time. And while we've been successful working together and collaborating with all of our colleagues across the state and with all of your support, it has to be someone on the other side in government that's receptive to that message and is willing to do something about it. We've been fortunate that this governor, Governor Shapiro, has been willing to be very vocal about support for IDA services and the people and families who need those services and those who are currently locked out of those services. But at the end of the day, it takes more than that commitment, and we're grateful for Governor Shapiro to be able to message that. But as Scott just sort of said or alluded to, we're in the conversation right now. We're not a huge part of the budget. A lot of the reason that I even wanted to show things like the graphic, Bob made a lot of great comments about whether you're fiscal conservative or the various audiences that we have to sort of communicate with. But all the budget debates are not really about where do we spend the existing money. It's about spending less money. And we're in a conversation about increasing fee schedule rates on an annual basis. So I think enough said here. If you have questions about this, put them in the chat or the Q&A. We'll try to answer everything that we can, but essentially you can find this in the regs. You can Google 6100.571. This will come up immediately. This is, again, the Bible as it pertains to rate setting for IDA services and programs in Pennsylvania. So if you go to the next slide, and what I'll ask Craig to do is really kind of drop the link to this bill into the chat. And this is not the bill that is going to hearing, but originally, in original form, both the House and Senate bills, both bipartisan, and that is a first this legislative cycle starting this year. We have bipartisan support in both chambers of the General Assembly. But if you take a look at this bill, and the bill itself is really not much longer than this slide, there's a lot of description about the importance of this, maintaining pace with inflation, direct support professionals, our workforce. But at the end of the day, what this bill literally says is that each July 1 and applied annually thereafter, the fee schedule rates will be adjusted by the Consumer Price Index for urban consumers, abbreviated as CPI-U, and that we will use, the wording of the bill says, most recent 12-month period. I think in our conversations with legislators and supporting this version of the bill in both houses, we were always of the mind that because of what I said earlier, the governor puts together a proposed budget in February. If you looked at annual calendar year inflation, which is a number that is completely known to the public. If in today's news, you probably received some feeds about what inflation did most recently, since the report was delayed until today. So we feel that inflation, as measured by CPI-U, is a number that everybody is kind of familiar with. So we've been talking about, even though the wording is the most recent 12-month period, the way the cycle would likely work is that we would look at annual inflation, as I spoke about a few moments ago, last year's annual inflation. Inflation for the calendar year 2004 was 2.9%. We can project right now, we're pretty far into the year, it looks like we're probably around 3% as I speak right now, that we would be at 4%. And there are some projections that say 4.1 up to even 4.5% in this calendar year. So just the enactment of that is really just the simplicity of we're going to take annual inflation, we're going to put it into the rates each July 1. And both from a timing perspective, transparency, and where does the data come from? I saw a question in the Q&A about home health market basket and why we may be deviated from that from earlier iterations. Now, I will first say that I have never been directly involved in anything in terms of TPA initiative or even working on this particular project that was using or trying to apply home health market basket. I'm aware of it, and I'm aware that it is something that's been used in certain pockets of services and is used a little bit more broadly. But I think the simple answer to the question is that back in, I believe it was 2016, the first time, Governor Wolf had issued an executive order that all government contractors and I believe Commonwealth employees were to have rate increases, compensation, pay increases based on the CPI-U. So we really just initially started by leveraging off something that the then governor was saying was applicable and wanted to see applicable to government contracts. So we kind of just borrowed the language from that executive order. I want to say it was 2016-02, and it was a very straightforward pronouncement. And of course, this didn't really go anywhere. Nothing was really enacted. It didn't really have impact or the force of law, but it was language that we used. And again, home health market basket, kind of a niche measure versus inflation generally. We just wanted to stick with inflation, understanding that we operate community services, our DSPs have to buy goods and services, attracting workforce is really, it's important to sort of follow along with inflation. So that's probably the best answer that I can give you, but I would say dating back now to 2016, which is a long time ago, we've really been consistently talking about CPIU, and the first iterations of the bill were also CPIU. So if you can go now to next slide, Craig, this is really where we want to begin to talk about House Bill 1939. And if you can put the full bill, again, this is on our site. This is what we'll talk about today. We'll drop it into chat so you can follow along if you care to or use it later. Again, I've seen a few questions. Yes, everything that we provide today will be available. A recording of this meeting will be available. And we really encourage you to kind of spread broadly to everyone in your organization, your DSPs, your board members, this information to the extent that you can, because as Scott and Bob and Nancy have already said, it's really important on a tight time frame that legislators hear about our needs and they hear directly from you if you're able to communicate to legislators why this bill is important, because it's to a point literally that every one of our elected officials is going to say yes or no to this. It's going to come before a committee of, I believe, 24 people, and it may come to the full House as soon as next month. So as we get into this bill, you'll first of all notice a lot more bullet points. And Bob Barber already spoke about this. There are some things in here that I want to go through in detail. I want to make sure that we are sufficiently answering any questions that you have. But essentially, why this is different is because ODP and Department of Human Services, so presumably the governor and his administration, have already weighed in on what it would take for them to support, and at the end of the day, for the governor to sign this bill. So unlike previous cycles where we've had legislation, last legislative cycle, or session, I should say, we did have a bipartisan bill in the House. And we did not have a bipartisan bill in the Senate. So it was the first that we had that this session beginning in this calendar year. So we couldn't have really said, we were often asked the question, well, even if you got this bill through the legislature, are you sure the governor would sign it? And certainly going back to the Governor Wolf administration, we did not have direct dialogue with anybody in the Wolf administration about would this need to be changed? How did he feel about this bill politically? So I think this is already an indication that the department has weighed in on this. I know when we as the associations speak with Kristen, she is intimately familiar with these bullet points. If you attended our July conference, we had a conversation right on stage. These were very fresh recommendations at the time. They had not been embedded into proposed legislation, but we were aware of them and we talked very openly with Kristen about them. So if you were there and you recall that conversation, she is familiar with what's behind these. And I'll go through them. And again, Nancy, Bob, Scott, please feel free anywhere to jump in on any one of these points at any point in this discussion. But you can first of all see that they have kind of shifted the timeline in the House bill. And I can speak probably at a high level to some of the reasons behind that. They're sort of looking at something we always presumed. We already knew that despite the legislation, that there's an annual budget cycle, and that this would have to be somewhere put into that cycle and somewhere approved as part of the annual budget. So I think in the mind of ODP and people at DHS, they want to see that approval. They want to see that budget get enacted roughly July 1 in most years, and then have the time to sort of look at what has to happen in the rates and go through publication and all of those sorts of things. So the second bullet point is annually, but limited to availability of funds. Again, sort of something that we anticipated would always be the case, but ODP, DHS wanted to see that in there explicitly. Something that is kind of a bonus for us, we didn't ask for, but the rates shall remain unchanged if CPIU decreases. So makes sense on every level. I think that for people like me who would go into it saying we want to make sure we keep pace with inflation, it could be argued against us. Well, a risk of that would be if inflation went down. Historically, you can look at the inflation tables for the last 100 years or so, and that's not really happened. But it was a risk. So this is actually a good provision that I want to call out. If it would go down, the rates would remain unchanged. Now that decrease would be netted out from a future change, and the wording is in the bill that addresses that exact point. So required notice and publication is another issue that we just presumed if there's a rate increase or change of any type, that the process is that these are noticed, they're put in the Pennsylvania Bulletin, there's a comment period. That is sort of embedded in law currently. So that is again something that ODP wanted to put explicitly into the legislation. And now we get into some of the issues that, there's the literal text of these, and then there's the reasoning behind it. And I think we're probably all familiar with the reasoning behind it, but I'll start with just the literal text of what's on the bullets. So commensurate DSP percentage increases are required by January 1. So if you think of this timeline, in ODP's thinking, there will be an approved budget by July 1 of any given fiscal year. They'll be in a position to notice, publish rates, make those rates effective October 1st, and then by January 1st, they certainly expect that a pass-through of wage increases to DSPs would and should happen by January 1st. So point of clarification, because I often hear this question, that does not mean that every dollar that you would receive as an organization in your fee schedule increases would have to go to DSP wage. It simply means commensurate increase. So if there's a 3% increase to the fee schedule rates, you're going to get 3% increase in total revenue. The portion you spend toward DSPs would also need to get a 3% increase. So that really is to sort of offset pressure that the department at every level, legislators here, how do we know that, and they ask this question as well, how do we know money we appropriate or money that you are asking for actually gets to the workforce that you say is so critical to administer and provide these services? So this is a check in the legislation for the pass-through. And I'm happy to entertain any questions and hear from our panelists here today. But at the end of the day, I'm going to say right here in the middle that there isn't anything that I don't believe we can't and shouldn't live with because of the change from where we are to where this would take us. So the last couple of things are sort of connected. There's going to be reporting. There's also this issue of lower bound pay rate. And this is directly derived from Mercer reporting and the analytics that the department does. These are things that we often argue against in terms of they haven't placed the wage assumptions at a high enough level, therefore they're not funding them at a high enough level. So this is a bit murky. You can look at Mercer assumptions right on the DHS website, if they're still there. A lot of the stuff they are saying the current rates are not based on that because of budgetary restrictions that were made to what the governor had proposed for the 2024 rates. But yeah, this is a consideration. However, if my review of lower bound rates, our average wage from compensation studies is well above that. This is, again, the department wanting to be in the position to say, we can tell anybody who asks that the increases that have been appropriated that we have put into fee schedule rates are actually going to DSPs. And a few times here, at least, we have shown how your work and your investment in DSP rates actually outpaces inflation, certainly outpaces the rate increases that we receive from ODP, and actually outpaces inflation. So you have, out of necessity, I'm sure, found a way to pay competitive wages to your DSPs. With that, there is also requirements for reporting. So the DSP wages have to be reported, benefit data, including health insurance, even including the employer-employee portions of Social Security. ODP wants to see that reported to them. And then there are penalty phases. If people are paying below the lower bound, there's something known as the IDA Augmentation Fund. This is technically established for monies that are savings from the state centers. The funds are put there so that they remain in the community IDA system. So ODP has identified the same vehicle to say, if we have to impose a penalty on a provider because they took this rate increase and didn't give it to their DSPs, they'll have to pay into that fund. Also, the ODP version of the bill, which is now the House version of the bill, they retain the regulation 6100-571. So whereas the simplified version simply does away with it, ODP would still like the ability to say, we would like to do some rebalancing of rates. We would like to look at utilization and say that we have a rate issue here or there. That is not without risk. That could mean that rates could be adjusted downward because of an analysis. Now, that hasn't happened in the past. That would follow the same process that the state is using now, which clearly ODP would like to retain. But that is, again, something that we want to call out. And then lastly, just the definition of who does this apply to. They go out of their way to say what a provider organization is. I haven't had this conversation. I presume this has something to do with having it not be applicable to individuals or family members who are hiring their own DSPs, that this only applies to the reporting and some of these requirements would only apply to provider organizations. But those are conversations that I think are downstream. So I will stop there for questions. Bob, if you would like to weigh in on anything here from your perspective, the things that you would like to call out most, but just most importantly, I want to make sure that everybody has a clear understanding of where we are today, and this being the component of the bill that next Wednesday, the House Human Services Committee is going to vote on.
Yeah, I would only comment that on the point about the DSP wage increases, kind of moving in step with the CPI. I think Patrick made the point, but I think historically we need, as providers, we need to pay what the market demands, and so we've been outpacing inflation. I think we all know that our direct support professionals, they could go work at Sheetz for $21 an hour, or Walmart for the same. And so, part of our challenge is that we need to compete in the marketplace. And so, while I'm not thrilled with the idea that our private organizations will be dictated to on the wage front, I don't think that it's as large of a challenge as I may originally have thought. So that's my comment on that.
Okay. Thanks, Bob. Nancy or Scott, I'll leave this up just momentarily. I want to make sure that those in the audience really get a chance to look at this. And again, I would encourage you to read the entire bill. I've made my best efforts to really capture everything here in a very straightforward way. But read the bill. If you have questions about anything on here, please ask. And then in a moment, Scott, I'm going to probably turn to you about lawmaking process, because there will indeed be sort of just the reality of it, another opportunity to probably have some of these conversations. But Nancy, I see your camera's on, so I'm going to presume that you have something to say.
Yeah, people on the call who know me know that I'm going to speak up on behalf of the waiting list and the more than 3,000 people on the emergency waiting list today. By this bill passing, we're going to be able to strengthen the provider system. Providers will be able to recruit, retain more DSPs, pay them wages that they, richly deserve, and be able to take more people off that waiting list.
And I think that I want to, again, I kind of feel like I can't emphasize it enough. We have worked together very effectively with our colleagues. I go back to something you said earlier, Scott. Like, without everybody pulling together on this, it would not be in the state it's in today. I want to say publicly how surprised I am that in a few short weeks after this bill got introduced, I mean, I think we were starting to show some frustration. Where is the bill? We knew we had commitment. We had Republicans, several who had signed on, and the bill got introduced. It was as promised. It took some time actually to get these elements in. But to remain in a world where we are at the discretion of government, and the sticker shock that ensues when a legislature has to pass hundreds of millions of state dollars. I think the efficiency, Bob, you talked about this as well. I think doing something that does instate some predictability. You know, what you're saying, Nancy, it's hard to build capacity and address a waiting list systemically if providers, individuals don't even know what the reimbursement for services are. And we understand that many years have gone by. We have been fortunate in recent years because we have worked together and we've effectively messaged that we have been able to get rate increases for a couple of the last few years. Still not up to inflation, that we are still lagging behind inflation pretty significantly. And to enact this legislation would really give everybody served by the system and everybody who's providing services the predictability of how you could plan going forward and what you could tell your workers and your workforce about the ability to do that. So again, I think these are all positives. And with that, Craig, if you can go to the next slide, I would like to talk a little bit about this is not the clearest slide in the world, Scott. Don't even think it's a slide that pertains to Pennsylvania, but not to do a full civics lesson here, but to kind of remind everybody, one chamber has taken the lead. It happens to be a chamber that we know right now to be within Democrat control. We probably have party line votes, but this is something we say all the time, and hopefully you experience as well in your individual context. We always talk about intellectual disability and autism services really being a bipartisan issue. And we don't ever really see evidence that it's not. This is a tough question when it comes to spending money, but this is our opportunity to call that out. We talk to legislators. We're asking for inflation. One of the things that I think is a key point, and Scott, maybe I'll ask you to weigh in on this. When you think about Medicaid, federal matching dollars, we're really asking legislators to keep pace with inflation, but at less than 50 cents on the dollar of state money. Again, it's all government money, but if I'm a state legislator and I can keep pace with inflation and maybe spend out of our state budget 45% of that from state dollars, I think that's a good bargain for the state. And again, we use sort of federal matching argument a lot, but here's a real tangible way to put it in place. So Scott, if you're still there, if you can kind of comment, like technically speaking, what's going to happen if we succeed next Wednesday, and if this goes to the full House in November, where we would be situated then in this still ongoing legislative session. Maybe talk a little bit about that first, if you can.
Yeah, sure. So the most important thing, big picture, is that generally speaking, very rarely does a piece of legislation, a bill, start the process, go through the process, finish the process the exact same. Sometimes it does. There's a special circumstance where a very specific thing needs to get done. But generally speaking, how a bill starts and how it finishes are usually different. And so I just want to kind of confirm I think it was Patrick's point that, that there will be continued conversations and discussion about each of the different provisions of the bill. So that process will go. It's also the case that, the bill has to pass the House, then it has to pass the Senate, and then it has to get signed by the governor. And in that process, sometimes the House will send a bill to the Senate, then the Senate will say, yeah, it's pretty close, but we need to do these changes. And then they'll change it and they'll send it back to the House. And the House has the choice to say, hey, you know what? Actually, yeah, those changes that's better. So we're good with that. Sometimes they'll say, hey, thank you for those changes, but we kind of like this version a little different. So sometimes it'll go back and forth a few times, but ultimately, again, at the end of the day, something has to pass the House that majority of the House agrees to, something has to pass that same has to pass the Senate, a majority of senators agree to, and the governor has to sign it. So I heard something the other day that I 100% million percent believe that cliche is a cliche because it's true, right? So ultimately, this process, any successful legislative outcome is going to be the result of true compromise where both sides have to give a little or all sides give a little. And even more importantly, that can never be the case where perfect is the enemy of the good. So I think Patrick is talked about that, Nancy, others. And so that's kind of big picture of the legislative process. And there's no reason to believe that at the end of it for this bill, for this issue, it's not going to be something that the IDA community embraces as just a monumental moment. So that's kind of that's the legislative process generally. Now, I will tell you some of the things that I think to just be mindful of, and Patrick has referenced them. I'm going to say the good one first. Generally speaking, legislators, Republican or Democrat, they really believe that DSPs are doing just essential work that that nobody that just has to be done, and it's they rarely think about the fiscal implications. Like, in other words, they rarely think that DSPs are somehow like gaming the system, or like hey, there's a better way to spend less and get more, right? So generally in your kind of neighborhood of the Department of Human Services, generally legislators don't have any issue with that. That's the good. The down is that the overall budget picture, that's going to maybe impact things. That's going to potentially impact how quickly moves, or the exact language, because again, not anything related to all of you as providers, but the big picture. Does the Commonwealth have enough money to afford an entire budget, not just not components, but the entire budget? And so that is going to be something that we'll monitor and we'll keep track of, and we will, like I think Patrick mentioned, each week your Government Affairs Committee talks about that stuff. So that is one that I think I think it's important context, because if the budget were already done, or it was just a slightly different dynamic, it's an easier road to say, hey, here's how you fix the problem, so year over year you don't have it, right? So that makes perfect sense. In a year like now, where they're, quite frankly, not sure how they're going to get to a budget for the current fiscal year, which is already 6 months, almost 4 or 5 months in, it's just harder. Their minds are going to be just a little bit more. We're just going to have to really focus in on how we make sure moving forward one aspect of the budget is addressed and is fixed and is all those kinds of things. So the upside, generally speaking, nobody's questioning all of you in terms of could you be doing more with less. Generally, that's not something that gets discussed. The downside is, because we're in such a budget mess, it's just going to be, it's going to take a little bit of prodding, and to Nancy's example of just, being a very strong advocate for the legislation.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I'm looking at a few questions we've had in Q&A and chat, and they're all somewhat lengthy, so I want to try to consolidate them into what it was a very good question and thought. And I think that I'll say up front, I'm not sure that any legislation makes all of our issues go away or stops us from the need to advocate. But the questions as they're coming in kind of address, if this bill is enacted as proposed right now, what duty does the governor have to put it in a proposed executive budget? What duty does the legislature have, if any? Because I've read it pretty literally, and I'll just say we would expect the process to remain the same, but there would be legislation that says this rate increase happens as long as it's in the budget and approved. Now, we have had sort of side conversations about, hey, can we somehow bypass the process we've been talking about if we're not successful, and how do you effectively advocate to the governor's office to make sure this is always in, and even write it into the legislation? And it's the write it into the legislation piece that I know I've received sort of what I'll say pushback and negative feedback. You can't really tie the hands of any governor to ask for what any governor wants to put in or doesn't want to put in to an executive budget, because it's It's a proposal, and it's part of the privilege of being the governor. You propose what you want in the budget. So I'm not doing a great job as I hear myself capture these questions, but they have to do with what duty does the executive branch have? If this legislation is there, would we expect the governor's office? And again, I will say, I think that we probably always need to have that conversation and make sure we're asking for it. But how do you see the legislation driving the process to actually making sure that CPIU would get into the actual rates? Scott, I don't hear you, so I'm going to presume maybe we've lost you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, I got you.
Okay. Um, so, so the most, sometimes we have to make sure we are realistic, right? So the most important thing is generally no future general assembly is ultimately required to implement something a previous general assembly has agreed to, right? So future legislators are not bound budget wise by what a previous budget has. Um, Now, it's more often the case that on the bulk of um, non-controversial stuff, generally there is continuity. Not on like a specific governor's initiative or legislative partisan agenda or whatever, but generally on the things where there is it's cost to carry, or it's non-controversial, or it's something that has become part of the budget fabric. Those things generally continue. Um, on something like this, I would suspect that most governors, uh, administrations, I would expect that they would do their best to keep the spirit of this legislation intact. I wouldn't, it would be, I couldn't sit here and say anything is guaranteed. That wouldn't be responsible. But I think, I think generally speaking, with something like this, uh, and I think the expectation would be that future governors would try to abide by administrations abide by the process, because again it's for a component of the system that is generally not, to Patrick's point, it's generally it's actually not even bipartisan. It's generally nonpartisan, generally speaking, and um and it's really an aspect of human services that is not like administration over administration put in the political burner. So that's kind of where I would be on it.
Yeah, and Steve, I see your clarification. So I guess I'll boil this down to as for the legislature to approve this, somebody has to put it in the first place for it to be considered approved. I mean, somebody has to do the calculation and say, here is the CPIU for last year. Here's the number we're talking about in percentage. Here's how it translates into dollars. And I see Steve's comment that the legislation could require a governor to put it in. We can't necessarily approve what they enact, and that's kind of the language that's in the bill now. It's subject to approval and appropriation. So I don't know that we can firmly answer this, but I'll give you one last chance, Scott, to weigh in on anything I just said.
Yeah, am I unmuted again? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Look, I don't know there's any better way to clarify it. It it's some of it is I guess, for lack of a better phrase, a leap of faith. But it's you have to there's any requirement on government to act in a certain way. Generally, government is going to try to have some flexibility in there, some whatever you want to call it. And that's just the kind of the reality of the legislative process. So I think, again, and I've been parts of legislation for other aspects of the Department of Human Services, where, again, our position today was pretty firm: "Thou shalt, forever and ever, amen."
which was greeted with, "Hey, thank you for that starting point, but here's how we're going to get to a place where at the time we said, hey, this is okay. This now makes this something that is going to be a part of the fabric of the budget. May not be a guarantee each and every year, but it's taken us from like total guesswork to a place where we're at least in the starting part of it, and then we still have to fight to get whatever we wanted at the time. So that's I don't know how if there's any more you can really say, Patrick, with any definitive
No, I understood. And I
answer.
think in the interest of time, maybe we'll move on to the next slide. And I'll kind of bring this back to what we're seeking here is to get officially in legislation signed by the governor that our rates are increased annually by the Consumer Price Index. And I think the more we try to answer all open questions, as you said, Scott, what I think we've all learned here today is there'll be an ongoing process before this gets to the governor's desk for a signature. And that will involve not just questions we have, but the administration will be weighing in at some point, ODP, other legislators. It's going to take a lot to get this passed. So as has been noted, communication, Craig, if you're able, I'm sorry, I don't think I gave you any heads up, but I mean, the link to contact your legislator, this is a link right to the Human Services Committee. I think there's 24 people, 26 people on the committee. It's weighed heavily, not heavily, it's weighed in favor of Democrat. But as we've said, even though there are more Democrats in sponsorship, we do have Republican support. I like how Scott just put it, nonpartisan. So you have the opportunity to just reach out and communicate with any member of this committee, your own legislators, again, to the extent they're going to say yes or no to this. We want them to say yes so we can continue this conversation. The fact that we are in the conversation is really an important feature that I don't want to minimize or neglect to talk about. The legislators in our General Assembly and our governor are all talking about our rates and our services, and they know the importance of the work that you do. So let's continue that conversation. We'll urge you, share this with your boards, give your DSPs a chance to talk directly to their legislators and to this committee about how they would see the benefits for them. If you're underserved, if you're on a waiting list, anybody that can really get the word out of the importance of this to our community, we really want to see that happen. So Scott, Nancy, Bob, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to give you one last chance to say anything you would like to say in comment. So Nancy, I see your wave. So signing off there. Bob or Scott, do you have anything you would like to close with?
I follow Nancy's lead.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Bob.
No, I have nothing additional, but thank you, Patrick.
Okay. Well, again, I thank all of you for joining us today. All these materials will be available to you. Recording should go out Monday. Refer back to us. This vote again is next Wednesday, House Human Services Committee. I believe they convene at 10:15 in the morning. So there is some time, very little time, to get your message out, get your thoughts known to our legislators. So thank you, everyone, again. With that, I want to go to our next segment where we want to talk about, in kind of a related way, reimbursement, budget, efficiency. We really have been kind of eager to talk about AI, the implications of AI on health, human services. So we've asked Scott Bachik to come in and join us today to really talk about the trends in this space and what's going on in AI. And Scott, it's always great to have you because of your work in our field and your history in kind of dealing with healthcare and transitions to managed care and acute care and other space. So it's really a pleasure to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things I'll start with, we've talked a little bit about already, performance-based contracting certainly has a lot of data and a lot of measurement, and that itself and in and of itself probably provides a lot of opportunities, probably affects your work, but I'm sure we'll get to that, but I thought maybe that's a good jumping off point because I think we all have gotten nervous about the amount of data, the amount of reporting, and the burden of that. I talked a little bit about this at the outset of the meeting with our supports coordinators right now being in a position. But I think you did attend the conference, I think previous slide. I know Governor Shapiro was in Pittsburgh with the CMU and Pitt conference. I think you were there as well. So I guess the first question we kind of want to get to is just really what is AI? But let me give you a chance to just start where you'd like to start. And again, I know you brought some slides along. Anytime you want to go to those, just give us the instruction. We'll toggle over.
Yeah, I don't know.
Craig, is that what you're doing?
Yes, just give me 1 second.
Okay. So
Sure.
if you want to wait for your slides to be up, Scott, or if you want to just kind of frame where you'd like to begin today. I know we talked about just kind of starting with the basics.
You can go on to slide 3, Craig, please.
Craig, we lost the deck.
I think, Patrick, I have the ability to share if you want me to try and share. Oh, there it is. Thanks, Craig. So, one, I mean, I think, Patrick, as you and I spoke a little bit on kind of preparing for today and and helping people get their arms around it, we wanted to start with, kind of foundational pieces or basic pieces of what AI is, and in its, we'll say, simplest form, it's really the process of using computers to be able to mimic human intelligence and actions, right? It's understanding languages, patterns. It's using technology to solve problems, make decisions, and learn from experience. I think what people maybe don't necessarily understand, that first part they do. The second part is really an important part. It is not just one technology. It is a stack of technologies. Right? It is a combination of different types of technologies to obtain different outcomes. And if you click to the next piece, Craig, please.
Greg, if we're having problems, maybe we can.
There it is.
Okay.
Thank you. So when you think of the technologies, this is a kind of an overview, and I've highlighted the two that people understand the most. But the technologies that can be involved in it, in this stack, is starts with machine learning. So it's the ability for computers and systems to learn and improve themselves based on things that happen or don't happen, and based on results, right? So the second piece is deep learning, where there's many layers of complex information that the systems are using to understand how components connect to each other and impact things. The third piece is natural languaging processing, which is really important for computers to understand what's either being written or verbally spoke to a computer. It's the ability to grab that language in either form and understand what it means and make responses or actions after that. The fourth one is computer vision. So it's the ability to see images, whether that be a picture or a graph, to be able to interpret that information. Number 5 is expert systems. So it's a rules-based piece that says it's basic a series of if-then statements. So if X, then Y. And then you get into reinforced learning, where it's really part of connected to the machine learning that's kind of a trial and error and understanding if what it's doing is correct or not. And then we get into the two kind of, we'll say, end platforms that a lot of people see and understand and have heard about. Generative AI, which is, the best example is ChatGPT. So the ability to create content based on questions or information. And then probably one of the, well, as we'll get to a little bit later, the fastest emerging of technologies within AI, and it is agentic AI. And agentic AI is built around what's termed as an agent. Those agents are trained to be able to actually go through a full system where it is to develop a plan, decide based on information and data what it is that plan is saying, what needs to be done, and then in some cases be able to take actual action. So when we look at AI, I know it gets a little bit complex, but it is a stack or a use of these different components to get the intended result or outcome. I don't want to go too deep, Patrick, but just wanted to share that. So if you want to
Yeah,
go,
absolutely. So Scott, can you give, if we can kind of transition to our world here a little bit, some examples? You mentioned chat, like what you see people using. Are people using large language models, or types of AI that you sort of see in our space right now?
yeah, in our space, we're seeing two kind of main threads that people are using it. Number one, a lot of the EHRs are integrating the generative AI to be able to supplement and create efficiencies in documentation. Anything from notes, clinical notes, to diagnosis or even treatment information related to the individual served. The second one is a little bit of a combination of the generative and agentic. It is that of the revenue cycle. So understanding within the context of a process, billing, are all the required pieces of information there, and even if they are there, are they correct or within, we'll say, thresholds of a given algorithm.
Okay.
So those are the two big areas where we see it today in our space.
Maybe just at this point in time, Scott, we have a couple of poll questions, and we'll ask those of you who are with us today if you could open the poll, Craig. It's one poll, but two questions. We just want to know if you're currently using AI, and based on any of the definitions that Scott's talked about, or just your belief and understanding that the tool that you have is using AI. And secondarily, if you have an AI policy, and even if you're not, I mean, some organizations have AI policies that they do not use AI because of concerns about HIPAA compliance and that sort of thing. So, if you don't mind giving us a response to those couple of questions, that'll give us some information from you as a group to work with today as we kind of talk through this. So whenever you want to share results, Craig, it looks like I'll just give a preliminary. It looks like we're kind of split on use, but we're kind of heavily no on having a policy. Kind of right now, north of 90% answering no about having an AI policy. So we'll get that distributed, Scott, really just about 50-50 on people who are using it right now. So go ahead, Scott. I'll let you continue, and we can kind of circle back to this as you would like.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Craig, if you could go to the next slide, please. Oh, yeah, the results are, so yeah, it's close to 50-50 yes and no, and 92% on the AI policy. So yeah, we'll get to this is very helpful. So what are we seeing in the market of AI? And this information comes from the Deloitte technology investment study just recently released. And so this study is across all markets, not just our space. I can say from our lens, Patrick, our space is not tracking with this, but it's important for our space to understand this. If you look at the chart, those percentages that you see there, it is the total digital investment initiatives budget, and it is a percent of revenue. So, what percentage of an organization revenue is spent on digital initiatives, and that's, you can see the percentages there. 24 and 25 were actuals, and then 26 is projected. And so, that's an increasing trend. On average, the digital spend on AI is anywhere from 20 to 50% of the total tech budget. They're seeing a growth of like 6% per year over year on AI investments. And the interesting piece, in the bar chart, stacked bar chart, the orange are non-IT budgets on digital initiatives, and the blue is IT budgets. What that means is the non-IT budgets are initiatives related to AI. They're operational in nature. The top three focus areas are the generative AI, predictive analytics, and data infrastructure. And if you go to the next slide, we'll dig into them a little bit. So when we look at generative AI, again, this is overall in the study, 75% of organizations are now investing in generative AI, which make it the #1 investment area currently within AI. Common use cases, so what people are doing, you can see those there. I'm not going to read through all those, but again, Patrick, what we're seeing in this space is mostly EHRs integrating in to help in documentation of things, as well as a portion of this being reflective within the revenue cycle as well. The good part about this is that there is productivity gains that are gained through this. The question, and we'll get to a little bit later, is what is the impact on the ROI, which is there's some interesting research related to that as well. You can go to the next one, Craig. The second piece, and this is a really important piece, Patrick, we see it in the world of business intelligence, but it's the same important component related to AI. The foundational data investments remain critical, and it's basically saying, if you look at the iceberg image there, the top part, the part that people see are the generative AI use cases and applications, the things that we interface with, and the AI models, really the generative models are at the surface, but it's what's below the surface that drives everything. Data management practices, capabilities and technologies, infrastructure, grounded with the piece on the right that has governance. These are the components that are absolutely critical, that are part of the success of an AI initiative. And you can see under key points, 50% of our spending focused on data pipelines, quality and governance of data. And I can tell you in our space that this is a critical item. As we work with providers on business intelligence, these are some of the things and challenges and struggles that we have in working with folks to get them up and running. It goes to the common phrase that we all hear: garbage in, garbage out, right? So an important piece. And then if you go to the next one, Craig, please. So when we look at agentic, it is the fastest growing part of AI right now. In the terms of the oversight mode listed on the left, humans in the loop, humans on the loop, autonomous agents, this is where things are going. So when we look at it, humans in the loop, meaning they're part of the process. They have the ability to approve or deny decisions or steps. Humans on the loop, they're monitoring it and really have the ability to stop it, versus in the first one, they're part of the process. It can't go to the next step until a human approves. And then humans out of the loop really means it's autonomous, and that's in its early stages. So, all right, I'll stop there. Patrick, any questions you want to raise, or anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, we'll certainly open it up. If you have questions in the audience, please pose them now, Q&A or chat. So I wondered, Scott, if you can kind of drill down into some of your experiences, revenue cycle, some of the specific examples maybe you're working with or that you've seen, or some of the HR things you've talked about, just, kind of bringing it into how members, organizations today are using it, some recommendations you might have, some of the tangible things that you think really get identified through using some of this AI tools, generative AI, to sort of lead toward those solutions.
Yeah, I think so. As I mentioned, those two, the one of the keys in its reference to this slide is it's to be focused in a confined area that drives a return on investment or result back to the organization. So given that, Patrick, some of the areas where we're working right now with providers, one is in the area of incident management, to understand and pulling together the data components that create correlations with the impacts on incidents. So staff tenure, staffing ratios, acuity levels of individuals, diagnosis of individuals, needs group of individuals, to understand predictive analytics related to incidents, right? And then the other area that we're working is really in HR, and how do we understand through, pulling data sets into a data warehouse, how do we understand the impacts on employee tenure? So we're in a couple of scenarios right now where we're pulling data to, everything from, customer, or not customer, but employee engagement, salary rates, um, tenure information, individuals that they're working with, programs that they're in, and understanding the impacts that all those elements have within specific individuals to drive tenure, right? And then the impact that tenure has on quality and outcomes of within the organization. So that's where we're at right now, and those are, goes back to what I had said on the iceberg. You can't get to that phase unless your data is organized, it's accurate, and you have the ability to holistically view that.
And back to both of the things you mentioned, Scott. So incident management, I'm always curious because I hear a lot of concern, workload, the pain points around investigations. So just anything that you think in terms of the preventative side, certainly really important, trending, how like actual completion of investigations on, say, that front, some generative tools. And then I'm curious also screening of applicants, how that can kind of inform how we try to attract good candidates for workforce. So, sorry if I've missed the point on some of the how you tried to direct this, but I'm also trying to look at tools that people can use who have to do this work that kind of get overwhelmed by the volume of it. How can AI effectively really help people save some time?
Yeah, so there's a couple steps to that. There's things that you can do without AI to get there, and the first piece of it, Patrick, is, again, and it go back to the iceberg. You can use BI to create automation of data and information. So the number one thing is how do you create the automation of movement of data and information into a central repository, right? And in that automation, what we found is it saves significant amount of time of people doing it manually within Excel. Like if you're typing things from EIM into an Excel file, there's no reason you should be doing that, right? And a lot of people do that, but that whole process should be automated. The second piece of it is then having the ability to, once you have it, that's where AI comes in. If once you have it organized, you then be able to create the analytics to understand correlations and impacts. So if you think of PBC and incidents, all the measures were process measures. And we know through discussions with Kristen, we know it's not going to stay there, right? It's going to go to how are we reducing the number of incidents? And there are a couple of metrics that talk about reductions, but most providers are not focused on that. They put corrective actions into place, but most of, we're going to say 50% of the corrective actions are staff education and training. As we move forward in this PBC world, it's going to be more results and outcomes driven. That's where AI becomes extremely important to be able to do that. And we're not seeing anybody do that yet, but that's why we're working on those projects.
So I guess, data, there's a mountain of it that everybody has to manage. And do you have any thoughts as far as how you kind of build up from here to put organizations? I'm sure you work with people that are at various stages of how well or not their information and data gets organized, or does the reporting requirement sort of drive everybody in a similar direction?
The reporting drive requirements do drive things. I would urge people within your core systems, and there are three primary and a couple secondary. The three primary are your electronic health record, finance data, and then your HR data. Some secondary are going to be quality measures like EIM and information, as well as the learning management systems. I would urge people, as of steps now, you got to make sure that data is clean. And you should be doing data audits on that information. to determine what data is missing, where there's inconsistencies in data. That is, as we work with people, Patrick, that is the number one thing. And most people don't know what they don't know. They don't know the data is a mess because they're not using the data. As soon as you start to create transparency and use of the data, it identifies deficiencies within the data, inconsistencies with data, and integrity. That has to be cleaned up. You can't take the step into AI unless your data is clean, because you're just wasting your money if you do.
Well, Scott, we're going to have to continue the conversation at a later time. I really appreciate the foundation you've given us. And let's definitely do that. Something you just said, you got to really use it to see where some of the flaws are, what you need to fix. So I encourage everybody to certainly think about a policy, certainly. Think about what your needs might be, communicate them with us. But Scott, thank you for being here today.
Sure.
Since we are out of time, I just briefly remind everybody, November 21st, Kristen Ahrens will be with us. I'm sure we'll have a lot to report. We'll get information out from this meeting. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great weekend. Thanks to all of our guests and presenters, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.